came to float.
So, Matt.
Hello.
Stephen King Part 2.
Oh, it's been good so far.
You have impressed me, actually. I wasn't sure you were going to enjoy this so much, but it sounds like you've kind of rated some of these quite high.
Yeah.
I'm quite impressed.
I mean, they're all kind of classics in their own right, really.
Yeah. A lot of them are crowd pleasers as well. Especially nowadays, I think they're starting to become critically acclaimed again. I think there was like a bit of a wobbly moment. There's a lot of adaptations that people go, oh. But I feel like the last few especially, they've really kind of up in the game. Mm-hmm. People are really understanding how to make the adaptations again and how to do them well.
We've got some absolute bangers still to come today, so I suppose we should
jump right in.
Just get going.
Yeah.
I mean, the hardest one maybe to talk about in terms of Stephen King is the one I'm going to start with, which is The Shawshank Redemption from 1994. And I say that because I think it's maybe the least tropey of his. In fact, a lot of people probably forget or don't realise that it's him.
I would totally agree. It doesn't feel like a Stephen King film or book at all.
Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies.
I've done a lot of digging, because there's got to be something underneath the surface here. I can't just say it's about a prison. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of justice and innocence, because it's really interesting the way the film approaches this. And I don't quite know what it's trying to say about the prison system in America. I don't know, but it ain't good. So right at the very beginning, in the opening scene, we've got Andy Dufresne, played by Tim Robbins. He's sat in his car, bottle in hand, he's very drunk, and he's got a gun and some bullets in the glove box. And we cut to him at a trial, being asked to describe the confrontation that he had with his wife the night she was murdered. His testimony is really weak. It looks awful for him, really. He doesn't actually even seem to care that much.
He's pretty much an emotionless character all the way through, really.
Yeah.
He doesn't display anything, really, most of the way through the film.
It's weird because a lot of the time you think, why? Why is he like that? And I think it is to serve the plot because of what happens to him. So he's claiming it's this fantastic coincidence. He gets sent down for 2 life sentences. The judge even says to him, "You are an icy and remorseless man." He goes to Shawshank Prison, and they call him like the hardest screw who ever walked a turn at Shawshank Prison. He is this remorseless person, seemingly. And the film doesn't really tell us the truth about what happened, at least not for a long time. But nevertheless, he is actually innocent, despite all the evidence or lack of. So the fact that he's been let down by the system, it does seem like there is a comment there. Mm-hmm. The other thing I quite like is so many others inside the prison, whether they're joking or not, they all seem to say that, oh, didn't you know, everyone in here is innocent.
Yeah, everybody protests their innocence when they're in jail.
But because we learned that Andy Dufresne is, it does make you wonder how many others are in exactly the same position, and they've just simply accepted their fate. That's it. It's been decided for them. It was out of their hands, and criminals or not, they're all men who are victims of a system that have failed them as human beings.
Except for Red. Red admits he did wrong.
Yeah.
But I do think Andy as a character, he is an outsider. Even in the prison, because he's an intellectual, he's a very intelligent man.
Yeah.
And he, in that way, stands out completely because you're talking like majority of people in there, if not all the rest, seem to be very blue collar men who are on the wrong side of the tracks, went down a bad path, and this is where they've ended up, and that's just it. But he does not feel like that at all, and he really is an outsider in that respect.
Yeah, I think he brings a fresh perspective for everybody, which is something I'll go into in a second. The other thing I thought as well is we talk a lot about bullies in Stephen King stories, and they're always kids or teenagers, but in this one they're actually all adults, and I think that's interesting. Even the warden and the guards, some of the other inmates as well, but the severity of the beatings and rapes and even killings and maggots in food and all sorts, it's really not pleasant, and I think it's interesting that it isn't all kids.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, which links into what you just said about him being an outsider, every Stephen King story has some element of otherworldly, supernatural stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
And on the surface, The Shawshank Redemption doesn't seem to be of that persuasion. It's quite a quiet, unassuming film. So it makes me think there's obviously something underneath the surface that has resonated enough with people that it's become the highest rated film of all time. It's too easy to say that it's just about friendship. I think there's definitely a feeling that Andy was sent to Shawshank Prison for a reason, that this fantastic coincidence that brought him there simply couldn't have been a coincidence. And the prison has elements to it that make it feel a bit unreal. You know, there's something about it, there's something a little bit off, and the general way that you just can't believe certain things are happening. You feel like you're not being given the full story. And I'm thinking maybe the prison isn't literal, it's hypothetical, and it's a test.
Wow, we are going into something here.
But I looked at the title and I thought, redemption. Like, why redemption? If Andy didn't do anything wrong, what do we mean by redemption here? Yes, he tries to get in people's good books, but most of what he does isn't for his own benefit, it's for everybody else's. And that's when I started thinking about the word redemption a little bit differently.
A lot of people gain from Andy being there.
Absolutely, yeah. So one definition of redemption is salvation from sin through Jesus' sacrifice. Yes, I'm saying that Andy Dufresne is Jesus Christ, sort of. If you think about it, though, he's brought into this imperfect world under bizarre circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Profoundly changes it.
Yeah. He slowly gains respect, popularity followers. He performs several miracles. He reforms the prison experience with library and education and music, with beer at one point, which is like the Last Supper in many respects. Suffering a lot for it all, spending months in solitary confinement. And Morgan Freeman's like this gospel writer, you know, writing about the stories of this man. An interesting interpretation of the film, really, that it's only when the prisoners are rehabilitated in their outlook on life, as per Andy's teachings, if you will, that they are freed. Because you see all the way through that Red is denied parole, even though he's perfectly normal and nice. And it's only until he sits down and says, you know what, fuck it, they let him out. So, yeah, I think he is sort of like this Christ-like figure that comes in and frees everyone. Redemption, Redeemer, Christ the Redeemer, anybody?
There's something about Shawshank, and I think it's why it's lasted, is it has a very timeless feel. It's one of those films, and I think it's because it's set in a historical setting, it doesn't feel dated.
True, yeah,
you
that makes
don't
sense.
look at it and go, well, that hasn't aged well, has it? You know, there's none of that. You're just transported into the story, and I think that really has something to do with why it's had such longevity.
I'm not saying it's an overly religious film, but I just think that there's a deeper meaning behind the events, that give it that extraordinary quality that other Stephen King films have, that transcended so many other films and made it so popular. I just think there's something in it. And it's one of the few uplifting stories as well that he's written. Yeah,
I mean, there's a reason, isn't there? There's a reason it's the most popular film ever, apparently.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason. So we're going to jump from there into, I would say it's quite similar in a way. It's a very similar time frame, and it's got a very similar, I mean, it's prison related as well as prison based. So it's very similar, and that's The Green Mile.
Your name is John Coffey.
Yes, sir, boss. Like to drink, only not spelled the same.
I think this has the same timeless feel for the same reasons. For me, watching this, there's certain themes come out from his usual tropes, but one that you don't see as often, which I thought was played brilliantly in this, was the power of innocence. So before I go into it, I'll just give a little brief if you've not seen The Green Mile. So The Green Mile is death row in the 1930s in this particular prison, and it's called The Green Mile because the floor is like a lime green colour.
Wouldn't sound the same if it was the Blue Mile, would it?
Yeah. Instead of the last mile, it's the Green Mile. And Tom Hanks and a number of other guards are watching the inmates of death row, and they get this huge monster of a man called John Coffey. He supposedly killed and raped these two little girls. And there's something different about him. Not any of them would have expected. And this is where the power of innocence come in. John Coffey is huge.
Yeah.
He looks menacing, but he has the mind pretty much of a child. He's scared of the dark. You know, you would just not imagine this man. And also thinking of these connotations and like representation at the time, he's a black man, he's huge. He was just thought of as trash, but dangerous trash. And he completely defies all those things. I mean, you can't imagine this massive beast of a man being scared of the dark. And there's moments later on where he looks up at the stars in just utter wonder, you know, and he sees the good and bad in people like a child would, black and white. That's a good person, that's a bad person. And that's a really huge part of his character and why I think he stands out so much. So he's fantastic. And he also has another trope that we see very, very often. I mean, most of the film is realistic. 1930s, prison guards, death row, you know.
It's the day-to-day, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's your standard. However, the psychic and supernatural abilities just kind of thrown in there as well. But they've just seamlessly, though. Like, there's not 1 second of this where you're going, well, this is bullshit.
No, you just don't question when weird things happen.
You're in the story, you're just there. There's no questioning of it whatsoever.
Yeah, that's true.
And John Coffey has this ability, or he calls it taking back what's bad. So, for instance, Paul, played by Tom Hanks, has a terrible, terrible urinary infection. Yeah. And by being just touched by him, he's healed. And that pain is taken away, and then he coughs up what looks to be like black flies, parasitic almost disease-like thing, and he's expelling it. Yeah. And another example, he brings the mouse, Mr. Jangles, back to life after Percy kills him. Yeah. And he also takes the tumour from, I think it's the warden. I think he's the warden, the warden's wife. And through that episode, gives Percy and Wild Bill their just desserts, so to speak. And I don't want to go any further into that just yet. Okay. But I will move on to that trope, because bullies being evil and irredeemable, they are sadistic in this film. You're waiting for something to happen to Percy because he's despicable. He's a despicable human being. He's horrendous. Yeah.
He's good at writing these people.
Yeah. I know. You wonder if the kind of people he's met. But Percy is... You find out he's a prison guard, but he has really good connections. He's married well. So he doesn't have to be there. He could be transferred somewhere else and get a much higher paid job if he wanted to. It's like he's hanging around so he can see somebody get electrocuted in the electric chair, and he can see death, which is horrendous in itself. I mean, that's a horrible thought that somebody's just hanging around to see that. And he's just despicable. All of his colleagues hate his guts and just want him gone. Yeah. Percy is a prison guard because he can abuse that power. Absolutely foul piece of work. He's violent and he enjoys seeing suffering and causing pain in others. For instance, as most bullies you find are usually cowards. He watches Dean, one of the prison guards, getting strangled, but does nothing to help. He's just watching, like he's just frozen in place. He shows his cowardliness when he's caught by the neck, round the neck by one of the prisoners, and then he gets himself away, but then pees himself in fright. Even though he's okay, he's away. He can't handle the situation. And then, like I say, he stands on the mouse and kills him just because he can. In the most ultimate horrible revenge, he leaves the sponge dry, which just because Dell laughed at him. Dell's one of the prisoners. He gets his revenge by leaving that sponge dry, not realizing exactly what would happen, and is horrified by what happens, but not in a I'm sorry kind of way. It's horrendous because it's such a terrible death.
Yeah.
But the good side of that is through John Coffey and seeing the good and the bad as he does, and in such a simple way, his way of kind of evening the odds again. And he ends up in the asylum that he was going to transfer to as a guard or an administrator or something. He ends up there as a patient, which is just
fair play.
Yeah, if ever someone deserved that.
Yeah, it's that word again, irredeemable, isn't it? There's
absolutely.
The villains in these stories never reform.
He writes amazing villains. I would say to some extent better than his heroes. Really, I think his villains are better. He writes such epic villains.
Yeah, I love them. We all love someone to hate.
Yeah, and they really do. And there's so many of them that I would think if you did a list of best movie villains, loads of his would be there.
Yeah,
because they're so memorable.
Yeah.
So I think Green Mile, again, this timeless quality, it's got a real classic feel to it. This is like a must watch.
Yeah.
It's got that real 90s classic feel to it. The ones that, again, just timeless, that you can go back to over and over. I would definitely give this one a watch. Just make sure you've got your box of tissues, all I'm going to say.
It hits you harder than you expect every time. Yeah, incredible film.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anyone who doesn't like it. That's also a good indication.
Absolutely.
So, bit of a jump then. We're going into the 2000s. We've got The Mist from 2007.
Don't you know the truth? We are being punished for going against the will of God.
Not a perfect film, but I think just the concept of it is brilliant.
And it definitely has a following. It does have a following, this film, whether it's up there with the greats, The Shining and Misery and all those kinds of things, maybe not, but it certainly seems to have a strong following.
Again, it's in the concept. It's just fantastic original storytelling. It's definitely the best example of the trademark of something ordinary becoming sinister, and it's in the title. It's mist. It's water vapor, people. So the whole film is a massive spoiler, so I'm going to try to skirt around what happens in the plot and just focus on the premise, and hopefully I'm not going to spoil much. So basically, there's a violent storm one night, and the following morning a mysterious mist descends over a small town in Maine. Yes, it is set in Maine. And there's a collection of local residents who have become trapped in the supermarket, including the lead character who's called David and his son and lots of others. And there is reportedly something in the mist. But everybody has a different opinion or belief about what is going on. And as time passes, the tensions and the conflicts that arise around the truth are quite severe, shall we say. And obviously they're dealing with a lot of doubt and denial and fear and panic and rational thinkers and irrational thinkers and fighting over leadership and how do we deal with this? To the point maybe where you start to question maybe the monsters aren't in the mist at all. Maybe they're inside. I'm not saying anything. But another great trope that I love in his films, anyone can die. And they do. It's a bit like, and then there were none in some senses. It's like, who's going to be next? Who's going to be next?
Yeah.
Great quote, just to summarise that from the film. Someone says, well, we're a civilised society. And then someone replies, well, sure, as long as the machines work and you can dial 911. But you take those things away, you throw people in the dark, no more rules, you'll see how primitive they get. Fantastic.
That's
summary.
really, that's so true.
Yeah. And again, it's the focus on humanity being bad. Even though there might be something terrible out there beyond the doors, it's what's inside of each person. The only other thing I can really talk about is the different ways that people interpret the events, the different way the characters interpret the events, because there's definitely three camps of people. It's like a Venn diagram, because all of them recognise the natural elements to the disaster that's going on. Some of them interpret it as an unnatural, man-made disaster, and then there's another camp of people who believe that it is a supernatural event. and each sort of level of belief forms a tribe within the supermarket. It's like Lord of the Flies, but with less trees. It's kind of like that. So camp number one, the close-minded ones, really, who can't really see past what they can see, that there was a storm, a bit of an earthquake, and some mist. The phone lines are down, they've seen some military trucks and some fire engines, and yes, they realise something's happened, but it's a natural disaster. And even though a man's come running across the car park covered in blood, screaming there's something in the mist, to them, they can't accept anything other than the logical, natural explanation and will refuse to believe anything else. And then you've got the camp of people who immediately start blaming the government and the military for all of the social and political and economic and environmental man-made disasters, like the mist is pollution caused by all sorts of things. There's so many rumours going around about what's happened in the mountains, just outside Maine. The rumours of these experiments and weapons testing or a crashed UFO and all these things, but it's fundamentally blaming government. And I think a lot of people in the film like to blame, not least the last camp of people, the people who believe that this is the will of God and some kind of divine intervention or judgment
religious
day.
People are always dangerous.
Well, this one is. So they've recognised that, yes, man has created all these abominations, and so the mist and what's in it is a punishment for destroying the secrets of life, that only God has the right to. We've trashed basically what he's created with stem cells and abortions and splitting atoms and moon landings. So initially, there's only one person in this camp, and her name is Mrs. Carmody, and she's one of my favourite characters in cinema ever. She's like the original Karen, like proper nut job. So she's an unpleasant busybody. She's always got a comment to make. You can imagine the type of person that she is. But she then believes that she has been chosen to save everybody. She's been chosen to save their souls, and it's her purpose, and she's God's vessel. The irony being that she's a terrible spokesperson for humanity and Christians. She ignores anything good the Bible preaches. Everything to her is dark and sinful and hateful and evil, and again, blameful. And there's going to be hell to pay, literally, in her eyes, and she relishes in that power. And brings out the worst in people, convincing most of them, a large group of people in this small space, that they must atone by committing these horrific acts on those who don't believe. And she basically ends up brainwashing a congregation of people. And I can't really go much further than that. But again, another quote which summarises that kind of feeling in the film. Someone says, if you scare people badly enough, you can get them to do anything, and they'll turn to anyone who promises a solution. So because she had the loudest voice and she was so convinced herself, she manages to rally up this army.
That's such a dangerous thing. If they are convinced themselves, that's the most dangerous. It's not that they're trying to do it for any particular gain. They actually are convinced that they're right. It's a dangerous mix.
Yeah. And like I said, she's one of the best characters. She's played by Marcia Gay Harden, who I love.
Who's fabulous anyway.
Yeah, absolutely adore her. One of my favourite characters. Great example of this religious fanatic trope. Still one of literally the best endings I've ever seen in a film, pretty much. It's yet to be superseded, I think, by anything else. It's definitely something, and people who have seen it will know what I'm talking about.
I am yet to see it, but it's very high on my list. Even though it's not like a huge film, you always hear like good things about it. It's one of those, so it's high up there on my watch list.
My only criticism really is that some of the CGI that happens in the film isn't really that great, but you just embrace it. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It does have its B horror movie moments.
Yeah.
But that in no way detracts from what's going on. Like, it's the people and the characters in the film.
Yeah, that's what you focused on.
Really carries it.
They're usually, I think, they're the ones that really last. If it's just a creature feature or there's no like humanity, there's no emotional depth to it, something human that we can catch on to, they're the ones that last. The others kind of slip away. There's nothing to latch onto. Yeah,
it's just so interesting watching the dynamics change across the film. Like I said, these different camps, these tribes of people emerge, and people show their true colours. So I really like it. Okay. So yeah, I love that film.
Wow.
So good. Watch it this week. So good.
Okay, we're jumping now again, forward to only a few years ago, really, to Gerald Game, which came out in 2017.
Gerald, say something, please. Wake up!
I'd never seen this one before. Again, just his concepts are just so good. Like, it's one of those things where everybody has this thought, well, what would happen if, this happened?
Yeah.
And he's just gone, that's a great idea for a book.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of this story, Gerald's Game, is that a middle-aged couple are trying to spice up their troubled marriage. So they go away to their
it's like a little retreat, isn't it?
Beachside retreat, isn't it? Yeah, a house in the middle of nowhere. They go there for a weekend, completely alone. Nobody's going to be there.
Convenient.
Yeah, convenient. And he brings handcuffs with him to try something a little bit different in the bedroom.
Spicy.
Very, very much backfires. So he handcuffs her to the bed, and then, really inconvenient timing, has a heart attack and dies. Which is horrendous. Now, for some bizarre reason, he'll never, ever make me understand why. They walk through the house and leave the front door open. I mean, I don't care if you're in the middle of fucking nowhere. What are you doing leaving your front door open? You're just asking for it. Yeah. And then there's also a stray dog right at the very beginning, which you think, well, that's going to come back. And they've left the door open so it can get in.
Yeah.
So this one, it's just full of those ideas where you just think, oh no, oh no, oh no.
Dread-filled moments.
Oh, and just the tension, it's so ramped up the whole way through. So there's a few tropes in this as well. I've just picked out a couple. Abusive parents is a big one, and which I had no idea was even going to come into this.
It properly emerges, that one. Yeah,
and it's very cleverly done because it adds so many more layers to the film. You wonder what they're going to do. How can you keep this going for like a film length? How do you do that?
Yeah.
So basically, in this really disturbing, I don't really understand it at all, but Jess, who's the wife, her dad masturbated with her on his lap when she was 12 and then made her complicit in the secret.
He kind of makes her feel like it's in her interest that it goes as a secret.
And the way he does it is horrendous, and it shapes her entire life after that, and it changed her that day. Her innocence was taken, and she was like shackled with silence.
Yeah.
Is the way they put it.
A different kind of handcuff, isn't it, that they talk about?
Yeah, exactly. And like I say, so much more depth it adds to this. And then there's also this something ordinary becomes sinister aspect to it as well, which obviously, like I say, King has this great ability to think of something so like fleeting, like a what if this happened idea, and then flesh it out into a complete story. So this is one of those ideas, a weekend away gone wrong.
Yeah.
Should be just an ordinary thing, but it becomes so horrendous. It's like this nightmare that you want to wake up from. What if you were handcuffed to a bed and your husband had a heart attack? What the hell would you do? You are thinking, oh my God, what would I do? Right, I would do this. Right, well, I wouldn't do that. What's she doing? I wouldn't do that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. There's like horrendous. There were a few bits I had to skip. I just couldn't handle. There's a
bit involving a hand, which is...
Yeah, the bit with the dog.
Pretty horrible. That bit's not so bad.
I mean, I don't know about you, but dogs chewing on people... not really my cup of tea, so I had to kind of skip that just a little bit. And yeah, the hand thing, that was I knew it was, I saw it come in and I was like, nope. So I skipped that bit.
Yeah, even though you think, okay, I've seen this done in films before, okay, I know what to expect, it's so realistic.
The thing about Netflix is I could still see it in the little boxes across the bottom, when you're fast forwarding it, so I knew where to stop. But I was like, I can't watch that. No.
It's really well. I mean, special effects wise, that genius. It looks so real.
So I was really impressed with this. I really was. So it's Carla how do you say her name? Gugino?
I've always wondered actually. I assumed it was a Gugino, maybe. Spy Kids mum.
She's fabulous, yes, and The Haunting of Hill House, which she did with Mike Flanagan, who is the director of this film. Her mother in this is Kate Segal, which is Mike Flanagan's wife.
Oh, I see.
Henry Thomas is the dad, who's also in The Haunting of Hill House.
All right.
So, there's people he's used before. The husband, played by Bruce Greenwood, who is also brilliant in this as well. He's in Doctor Sleep, which is also Mike Flanagan. So Mike Flanagan is obviously a Stephen King fan because he's done a few adaptations now.
Yes.
And I'd say very successfully. But this one, it's very short, but it's very good. I was really impressed. It like really stuck with me. And there was a moment in this which really scared me. There's a moment where she's looking into the corner of this room and there's just a huge shadow. And I swear to God, I was shitting myself. It was really
horrifying.
well done.
Yeah.
It was just perfectly made, I think, this one. I don't think there's a bung note in it.
I'd say the only thing that I didn't like about it is just some of the dialogue. I think it's sometimes a little bit too spoon-fed. I don't think it needed to.
Possibly.
I think we kind of got it, and the message at the end, there's a very strong message, which I love, but I don't think it needed to be that literal. I think let us be clever,
The idea that she's seeing, like, it's almost like she's cracked a little bit because she sees herself, like a harder, like, version of herself that can help her get through this. And she also sees the ghost of her husband.
Yeah, they're like the devil and the angel, aren't they, on their shoulder?
Which I wasn't expecting either. I wondered, like, how they were going to go through it, what was going to happen.
Yeah.
I thought that was so clever because I was like, now we've got a film. This is how they're going to do it. This is one to watch. I absolutely recommend it. Yeah. I really, really thought it was such a good concept and it was pulled off really well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Interesting one next, starting with the same year, 2017, but also incorporating some of 2019 because we're revisiting it. So these are the remakes.
We are.
We'll float down here. Yes, we do.
I said last time that I would basically explore the same points again, but just compare the two and see what was done differently or better or worse. So, in general, much bigger budget. I mean, the other one was a TV miniseries.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been injected with cash. Every aspect, I'd say, is elevated in some way. I mean, everything, the music, the production design.
Yeah, for a horror film, it's almost like pristine in a way.
Really well made. Almost like they were making this going, right, let's not mess this one up.
Exactly, yeah, absolutely.
This is going to be the one that people are going to go to, I think, for this story.
There was a lot of hype for this.
Yeah.
People were waiting for this to come out, like they haven't for a Stephen King film for a long time.
Proper event film.
They were waiting for this.
Yeah. And one of the things they did, which I didn't realise until you'd mentioned it last time, but the change of the time period, so not set in the 50s anymore. It's now set in 1989, I think mostly part one. And then jumps to the present day for part two.
Yeah, they've really moved that forward. I think mainly that was because they wanted to have the present day setting rather than the 80s childhood.
Yeah,
I think it was more to do with having it present day.
Yeah, there's lots of things that I think came with it. More of an appeal for modern horror audiences. It's definitely much more modern in general. There's also something they've done with the kids as well. They're all of a sudden much edgier and they swear a lot more. There's a lot more banter and dark humour in that respect.
More wise to the world because the world had changed by that point. It wasn't as innocent a place.
They have 80s music and stuff now as well. I think it's just naturally they're less proper, so it's just more fun, I suppose.
Yeah.
More mainstream. In terms of the structure, this is obviously chronological now across the two films. Surprisingly, even though I'd say they work better as separate films in the remakes, they still seem to serve the overarching narrative a lot better. Even though the original was jumping back and forth and joined up, this one actually I think did it better and gives you much better emotional payoffs. And in part two they do flash back and forward a little bit, but cinematically the way they do that is so much more effective. Whereas in the original I thought part two was really quite empty. I really didn't feel like it contributed anything that I kind of wished it had ended at part one, but this one definitely just built and built and built on what the first one had done. So they went hand in hand really well. I think the casting was much better. I think the matches of the kids with the adults was fantastic. Even, we know what James McAvoy and Jessica Chastain and Bill Hader look like, but they really did match.
Yeah, I think it was absolutely superbly done.
Yeah.
Really, really, I was really impressed by that.
It's really, really good. I think it was a lot darker. I think the violence in particular was a lot less implied. I think it was very in your face this time.
I feel like that's something about a TV miniseries that was never going to be able to go there
happen, was it? No.
in 1990.
Yeah.
They were never going to be able to do that, whereas now there's that leeway to do it. Just going back to the characters, the adults and the kids there, I think one of the things that made that work so well was I read that the adults studied the kids.
Right, which makes sense.
They literally took on their character and how they did it and absorbed all of the tics and the traits and how they spoke and how they did it.
Yeah.
I think they really pulled it off.
That's really, really good. In terms of like the trademarks, I think obviously we covered so many of them last time, so I won't reiterate any of those, apart from one, I think, which was the abusive parents. And I've not read the book yet, but they really ramped it up for this one. For the characters that we didn't get so much of the first time around, like Stanley and Eddie, obviously we knew it happened with Beverly, but I thought even Henry Bowers, the bully, you get a bit of abusive parent vibe from him as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which the original didn't give us. And that kind of leads on as well nicely to just the amount of detail that these two go into. They're very long, but it better showed each person's first encounter with Pennywise. It helped us understand their fears and flaws. You get more history of Derry here and the origins of It. So It Part 2 is 3 hours long, and it really does explain a lot more about what's happened, whereas the 1990 one, you're none the wiser, really.
No, that's true.
And so many more sequences added in, probably from the book, but like the well house in chapter 1, great sequence, just haunted house sequence, basically.
Yeah.
Same in chapter 2, really. All the stuff with them finding these tokens, and there's the big lumberjack statue scene that's improved on, and the Mrs. Kirsch scene's much better. They definitely go hand in hand. I mean, like I said, you can watch chapter 1 completely on its own and leave it there, but then part 2 fills in gaps that you didn't know were empty the first time around, and I like that. Even things like what happened to Henry after he fell down the well.
Yeah.
The fact that they had this clubhouse, and they had a big fight in the first one, and they all went their separate ways for a bit. What happened in that period of time was actually really important, and it doesn't tell you the first time, so I like that. Pennywise, this time played by Bill Skarsgård. So Tim Curry played Pennywise like a classic clown man dressed in a costume with sinister motives. Bill Skarsgård plays Pennywise like a creature. There's never a feeling that he's a man, or there's a man beneath it. I think facially he's an excellent choice. He's got a very unusual, distinctive face, a bit like Cillian Murphy, I guess. He's kind of like striking. He could be a model, but also you think weird face, especially his mouth and his eyes.
He is scary in this part.
Yeah,
he really is absolutely terrifying.
This will be the role he is known for his career now.
I think so. There's moments you're watching it and you think, oh my God, it's like you are really in this role. He looks insane and he is absolutely terrifying.
You can tell they built a lot of the character around him.
The thing is, you mentioned this in the first one, you want to see Pennywise, but you didn't get enough of it. You just didn't get enough. Tim Curry was brilliant. But you just didn't get enough of him, and they knew this time that we needed to see him.
Yeah, they had the money and the resources this time around to do it. I also like how he was always salivating. But yeah, he was just this more distorted humanoid look, which added to the scariness of him. Not the creepiness, the scariness. Physically, he's much more monstrous and animalistic. I think Pennywise by Tim Curry was quite static, but Bill Skarsgård is just violently unpredictable.
Yeah, he could do anything.
Completely unstable and unpredictable and uncontrollable. And then the voice. I love talking about the voices. So Tim Curry was like a man, with a Brooklyn accent. The best way I can describe Bill Skarsgård, it's like a demented cartoon character, like a demonic Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
or something. But there's this like hungry breathiness to it. His range is like really high pitched and low pitched. That growliness about him suddenly happening. It's just really effective.
Mm-hmm.
As a verdict, I'd say Bill Skarsgård is the much more threatening and scary Pennywise, much more fitting with a contemporary horror type. And jump scares, don't really get that many in the original. It's more just creepy.
That's what horror's built on now, though, isn't it? Is those jump scares, that's what's expected.
It's hard to say which one's done it better. They just did it differently. And as you say, we get so much more screen time with Bill Skarsgård, and he's injected into the story and into the screen just at different places.
Yeah.
And then the very last thing, special effects. So you could argue CGI is less creative in terms of creative ideas, but I think it definitely enhances the performance and the effect of Pennywise, because there's certainly no limits on the filmmaker's imagination here. So I think it's better at freaking you out visually, because he can literally shapeshift into anything, and I mean anything, really nightmarish figures, and he can defy physics even more than he did in the 90s. He's like a hallucination, and yeah, I thought that was really good. I think that is kind of it. I mean, they use CGI for lots of things, really, not just Pennywise, but they could do that now, which I think really helps. So yeah, a really interesting case of a remake maybe being better than the original. I think it's much more detail-oriented and faithful to the book, obviously. I think it works better as a horror film, and yeah, I think they both have their qualities, but I think these two films are really quite good.
They are high up there on the list, I think, that you would say are successful adaptations. There's so many that aren't, but these would definitely be up there with successes. And now we're going straight on to our last film. We've made it to the last one. So this is Dr. Sleep, which came out in 2019. This is the Shining sequel that Stephen King wrote many, many years later.
The mind is a blackboard. And this is the eraser.
It's a funny one, this one, because this is a sequel to the book and a sequel to the film. They made the decision to do both.
Having read the book now, certain things that happen, well, one big thing that happens in Dr. Sleep, the film, I thought, right, that's from the Shining book.
Yeah. It's a strange one because it's very much a mix of both. It's taken parts from the book and it's taken parts from Stanley Kubrick's film, so it's running with both there. I don't think it's a bad thing, though. I think it's, saying, right, there's these two entities and they're mixing them together, and I think it works. So the film centres around Dan Torrance, who was the child in The Shining. He was only 5 years old or so. He's now a grown man, played by Ewan McGregor. Lots of issues. And this film centres around the psychic abilities of The Shining and these kind of creatures, basically, that are out to feed on it, basically, I would say is the way I would put it.
Yeah,
and that brings in another character, Abra Stone, who's a young girl who is extremely powerful, very much like Dan was when he was a kid. And they latch onto this, and it goes from there. There's a great villain in Rose the Hat, played by Rebecca Ferguson. I loved her in this. I thought she was the best part about the film.
Okay.
One of the things that doesn't work so well, and some people will like it, some people won't be bothered, some will hate it, is there's whole scenes recreated from The Shining, like the biking through the hotel, and the roles are recast.
Yeah.
So you've got Danny...
Discount Shelley Duvall.
Shelley Duvall look-alike. And then you've got...
you got the Jack Nicholson...
got Jack Nicholson as well, which is funny. That's like almost like a surprise. You don't know that's going to come up. And then you've got the cook as well from the first one, his spirit.
He was great.
He's fantastic, yeah. But it's a little jarring, I would say. It's probably the best way to put it. You're like, oh.
Yeah. Not pretend that you haven't seen The Shining, but you've just got to imagine almost like you watching it again.
Yeah, it takes a minute to get used to it, I would say. Once you get into it, I think you kind of forget and it doesn't matter so much, but it is a little jarring at first, I think. With this one, I think as well, just like The Shining, I really feel like Mike Flanagan hit on the same thing Kubrick did, is you can feel the menace. You know, again, as they drive towards the Overlook, there's there's this continuous pulsing heartbeat, the music, the original themes there, the ominous dark, epic tones, you know, that he's brought all those things back, and he's been able to like kind of recreate those things in the film, which I thought was very well done. In terms of themes, again, there's alcoholism and substance abuse in this one.
Lots more than Kubrick put in The Shining.
Yeah, I feel like Doctor Sleep is a creation made out of the fact that The Shining didn't do what he wanted it to do. So he like made this book like that was really all to do with those subjects that were only hinted at before. He wanted it really at the forefront. So Dan's an alcoholic in a really bad way. He's unable to cope with his abilities. So he's turned to substances to kind of black those out as much as possible. And that's kind of where we start with him. And he's drawn to this place where he starts to rebuild his life and become a better person. He starts to work in a hospice and has this ability to know when people are going and to help them kind of towards the end and not be frightened of what's coming, which obviously involves his psychic and supernatural abilities. But they really come to the forefront the further through the film we go. We start to be introduced to Rose the Hat and her group. They feed on the shine. They track it down and they feed on it. It's almost like a mist that comes out of people. And they feed on it and it gives them long life. This shine is very much a main focus of this. Dan and Abra don't come from the same place. They communicate together through the shine, you know. This one also obviously has the unexplained evil force. To the Overlook very much comes back into this one. Now, that wouldn't have been possible if they'd followed the book completely.
No.
But they decided, I mean, you can't do a Shining sequel, which is what this is, without the Overlook. You know, you have to have that there. And I think they knew that. And they really use it well. I really liked it. It's fantastic. It's eerie. It's empty and it's been left to rot, basically. And you're seeing like the remembrances. You see the door with the axe, you know, the shaped holes in it. And
it's almost like it is a real place, as if you can go back and see it.
Yeah, no, you get that feeling. That force, that evil force is what feeds the Overlook. It's what keeps it alive, and it you see, especially at the beginning, it follows Dan when he leaves. It's, you know, and he is inevitably drawn back to the hotel at the end, and it's through that force that they, you know, come up with this plan to defeat Rose. And this is another one actually. I feel has that anyone can die trope in it.
Well, yeah.
Oh my God, it's horrendous. So innocent, like sweet kids are killed in this. Like this is not nice. One of the standout moments in this for me, and it is horrendous, is the death of Jacob Tremblay's character, the baseball boy. That is absolutely horrific. It's horrific. It's terrifying. And my God, did he nail it? I mean, he is screaming for his life. You would well believe he was actually going to be tortured and killed. He aces it, but it's very hard to watch. It really, really ramps up the idea that they're not human. There's no emotion in them at all. They are pure evil.
One thing I definitely have trouble getting on board with, I suppose, is I love the stuff to do with Danny and watching Danny as an adult. It was really well done. I believe that he was, I mean, he even looked a bit like Jack Nicholson in some scenes when he puts his head through the door. I go, how have they done that? Is that just how he looks? Has he always looked a bit like Jack Nicholson? I love that. And the alcoholism thing and all that stuff. I thought that was great. But I almost feel like there's a second plot to this film, which is the Mad Hatter lady and the girl, the child. I feel like that's a different film. It feels to me like two separate stories. I still would have enjoyed the Rose the Hat lady stuff as its own story, and I wanted to focus on Danny. I just wanted a film about him. Well,
I suppose that's good in a way, because it means that it's a very well developed character. You know, you want to get to know him, you want to spend time with him. So there's that about it.
Yeah. I liked the universe where The Shining was just one thing, and then introducing monsters into that world. That to me is a separate story that should have been kept.
I think I gave it the lower mark originally because I just read the book, it ready for the film coming out. And the fact that there are some big changes in it, and I was just like, oh, I don't know about that. So I was a bit, but now that I've got that distance from it and I've rewatched it, it is very well done. What it's trying to do, it succeeds at. So that's Stephen King. 2 parts, lots of movies.
12.
I think he's got a lot of fans, an awful lot of fans, but he's got an awful lot of detractors as well.
People like to hate on something that's popular though as well, don't they?
I don't see it. I don't see why. I think his concepts for the most part are brilliant. I think he knows how to entertain. He writes great villains. He writes great kids coming of age stories. He writes really meaningful stories as well. I mean, look at Shawshank and the Green Mile.
They're not all horrors.
There's something about them that just stick with you. You know, and I don't see it, frankly. I really don't.
If people have got criticisms about the quality of some of the films, so do I, but I don't think that takes away from the like I say, the concept and the writing of them in the first place. And I think it kind of adds a little bit, you know, to have them a little bit cheap sometimes. We talked about Misery being so great and loved, but it is kind of on the lower budget side, and Pet Sematary is the same. And a lot of them, especially the early ones, are. It's only recently we're getting massive budgets. And it's interesting to see how audiences are carrying him.
I've enjoyed it because there's been a lot of really critically acclaimed movies in here, really popular classic movies that have stood the test of time, and some new ones that have been really worth watching. So I think it's been really a success all around.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I've watched more as well that we haven't talked about. I watched Cujo, which to be honest is at the bottom of the pile. To be fair, Gerald's Game is more of a scary dog film than Cujo is. Let's just put it that way. And I watched Apt Pupil with Srian McKellen. Yeah, I really enjoyed that as well. But really enjoyed that. And obviously I've got the books now.
And you bought yourself the lovely, nice, brand new, shiny covers of lots of the books.
So I'll be dipping into more.
Damn right you will, because I'm going to keep bothering you until I know you've read them.
Have you read The Shining now?
Have you read them yet?
It only took me 2 weeks, which is good for me.
So that's it.
Wow.
Stephen King, tick, done.
Tick. Yeah, that felt like a collection that was worthy of doing it, needed ticking.
Yeah. So what's next?
Next, we've not even spoken about it yet. But
no, we haven't.
We're going to be exploring another writer. We're going to be looking at and director, actually, the films of John Hughes. A lot of the 80s classics.
This will be good fun.
I've not watched a lot of these, to be honest, but
I haven't watched them for a long time.
Definitely going to be touching on The Breakfast Club.
Absolutely. 16 Candles.
16 Candles. Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yep.
Pretty in Pink.
Just to name a few.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. That'll be really fun. And again, for me, ticking things off the list that I've just not quite got around to yet, and some which I will be revisiting with fresh eyes, so that'll be good.
Fantastic.
Ooh, do you have a Stephen King film you'd like to recommend?
It's got to be Gerald's Game, I think. It's short and sweet. Perfectly done, I think, for what it is. Great concept. Really pulled it off. Great acting. Definitely. Cool. It's like an hour and 20 minutes long. This is, nice, it's easy watch.
Yeah. I think with this one, I'm going to recommend The Mist, because I do think there are pockets of people who haven't seen this, or if they haven't, they think they know it.
Yeah.
But they don't. You don't know it, Mary. You just don't. I'm going to go with The Mist on this one, although I would say, obviously, that The Green Mile, Shawshank, The Shining, Carrie.
Pretty much all of them we talked about, really. You should watch them all. Just go back and watch them all.
God damn it. So, highly recommend.
Okay. And Matt, where can they find us?
Well, you can find us on our website, cinechat.co.uk/podcast. Especially look forward to a top 10 Stephen King list coming out from the group.
Chat team, so that will be fun.
Yeah, that'll be coming soon. Or across social media, you know the drill: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, other places. Just search for CineChat Podcast, or you can email us at
podcast@cinechat.co.uk.
Yay! I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And we'll be back at it very shortly.
So it's bye for me.
And it's goodbye from me.